started. I hope that everybody's doing okay and that you survived the tornado last night. We're all fine. It looks like we're missing a few people. We don't know what happened. Hopefully they're okay. But anyway, yeah, so today I want us to keep going, get us back into our narrative of the 20th century and chronology of the 20th century. And so we've spent this last several days, this last several classes, really 4 classes in a row, talking about the idea of modernity and progressivism and ideology. And now what we see as we break this down into what's going on in the 20th century, we actually have this time period in American history that we call the progressive period. And it deals with not only a number of progressive policies, but also a number of progressive foreign policies as well. And so when we're talking about progressivism, now that we're thinking about America as a whole, it's not quite as theoretical as it once was, but instead we're going to see serious applications of what it means for this to be working on the ground. And so there are a couple of things that we can say about, again, what we call the American progressives. And we always date this period of progressivism from about 1890 up until 1920. So not that it doesn't keep going, and we're in somewhat of a progressive, anti-progressive period right now as well, and have been since the Bush administration 20 years ago or so. We've been in this kind of neo-progressivism with both Obama and Bush. But we see it very clearly again between 1890 and 1920, and it's almost always best represented by the 2 most progressive presidents of the time, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. And again, notice what we see here. Progressivism is not political. It's a theoretical or historical understanding of history. Because if it was political, we wouldn't have both Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Teddy Roosevelt, serious conservative, Woodrow Wilson, serious liberal. They wouldn't both be progressives, but they are. So we have to keep that in mind. So what do we see about progressive policies that really holds all the progressives together? Probably the most important aspect, and we talked about this when we were looking at Whittaker Chambers and others, the most important aspect of progressivism is the desire to expand the size of the government. Right? That's just number one with the progressives. They think that all change in society must be governmental change, and therefore they think that the political sphere is superior to all other spheres in life. Right? Political sphere is that which should predominate over everything. So politics trumps culture, it trumps religion, almost everything. And it's fascinating if you look at the progressives, and I think this will make sense once I say it, but it may be a bit surprising, and that is if you look at almost all the progressives, they are almost all the sons of evangelical ministers. You just see it straight down the line. Those people who were progressives are the sons of evangelical ministers. And what they've done is they've taken the zeal of their fathers, but they've placed it in the political realm rather than in the religious realm. Right? So we're going to see that and that kind of zeal. But the second thing we can say about progressivism, so if number one, it's deeply political and always looking for governmental control. Number two, it's very confident in itself. That is, remember, it makes a god of history. And so history is inalterably moving forward towards some kind of good point. And you're going to find with the progressives that they all have a different endpoint for what they're doing. But they believe that there is an endpoint where we come to this place, as they would put it. And I just think this is bizarre, so it's always a little weird for me to teach. But as they would put it, you reach the end of history. And it doesn't mean that time is over. It doesn't mean that time stops. It means that history no longer has its godlike purpose because we've reached some end. For someone like Marx, it would be a communist utopia. But for someone like Wilson, it would just be this point where the state controls everything and we're in some kind of balance and equilibrium. So we see that with the progressives. But number three, the third thing that we have to note about the progressives, and this always makes modern progressives very, very uncomfortable, and it should. The progressives, and this isn't shocking when you think about it, they're deeply, deeply racist in every way. They hate American Indians. They hate Jews. They hate Catholics. They hate Lutherans. Now, basically anyone who is not a part of what they would consider to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, they want nothing to do with. And so one of the most famous phrases that comes out of the progressive period is they want to yank the hyphen out of hyphenated Americans. So no Jewish Americans, no Catholic Americans, no Polish Americans. They just want Americans. And by that, they mean white Protestant Americans. So they're deeply, deeply bigoted about this. And, I get a little frustrated when I hear people say, oh, everybody was racist in 1890. That's just not true. The progressives were racist, but there were all kinds of people who were fighting racism at the time. But, it makes sense when you think about progressivism. It categorizes, it says that everything is the thesis versus the antithesis, creating the synthesis. It makes sense that race would get caught up in that. So it's not necessarily that all progressivism is inherently racist, but historically it has been deeply racist as it's ever gotten in American history overall. And just think about some of the laws, for example, that the progressives passed with American Indians. What they said with the American Indian was that they wanted to destroy the Indian to save the man. And so just two policies that became predominant among American Indians. Number one, you could go as a white person, you could go into any Indian village and just take away all their children and take their children and remove them to East Coast boarding schools where they would wear only white clothing, they would have their hair cut, they would be taught that all of their rituals and religion were just total superstition. And so you go to a place like Carlisle, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was called the Carlisle Industrial School, and it's where they used to, and without permission, they would just take Indian children from their parents and put them in these schools. Well, you walk out to the graveyard of these schools, and it's one suicide after another. It's just a whole graveyard of suicides because these kids don't want to be raised away from their families. It's horrific in every way. But the second thing you could do as a doctor, if I were a medical doctor and I went onto an Indian reservation, I would almost always make sure that once a woman had one child, she would never have children again. I would sterilize her as a doctor. And this was done all the way up until the 1970s. White doctors were still sterilizing American Indian women. It's just insane. It's truly, truly evil in every way. So those are the kinds of things that I want you to think about when we're dealing with the progressives. But I want to add a fourth thing, or otherwise a lot of what we talk about today won't make sense. The other thing we see about progressivism is that it takes the argument of democracy to the nth degree. And it basically says, if we, the American people, as a majority through the democracy, decide a thing is right, then we have the right to impose that not just upon America, but upon the world. And so the progressives And it's just as true with modern progressives. Whether we're talking about George Bush or we're talking about Barack Obama, they love American empire. They love empire. They want empire. It's what we would call the neocons today, right? The people who are advocating war, like Lindsey Graham, everywhere, right? These guys are just complete progressives. And progressivism always, always takes a toll when it comes to foreign power. And so what we find during what we're calling the progressive period of 1890 up through 1920, we see that the United States is involved in one war after another. And the most important, of course, is the Spanish-American War of the late 1890s, in which we get the Philippines and briefly have Cuba, and we take Puerto Rico, all of these places that still are very messed up, are in many ways messed up because of our imperial ambitions of the 1890s. So that's why I had you guys read what you read for today. First of all, we have Willam Graham Sumner on page 559 and the fallacy of territorial expansion, and we'll look at that in just a second. But we have this great, and Sumner was a very prominent Yale professor, very much against imperialism in every way. But then notice what we have and what I gave you guys to read for today. Right after you read the fallacy of territorial expansion, you read the March of the Flag, which is the ultimate statement of progressivism in foreign policy, right? This is just taking everything America stands for and making the whole world America. And as I hope you guys saw, there are direct ties back to not only John L. O'Sullivan in what he said with Manifest Destiny, but also to Crazy Lorenzo Dow. Right, so if we had those three documents, if we had Crazy Lorenzo Dow and we had John L. O'Sullivan and we put the March of the Flag together, they would make a little primer on American imperialism and what America is thinking of. And I want you guys to recognize this, especially at your age, and to think about what you guys are going to have to be wrestling with for the rest of your lives. There are roughly right now, and I didn't check this morning, I could have, but there are roughly about 200 countries in the world, right? It's always this crazy, it's between about 195 and 205, right? There are always 10. We wake up and we don't know if they're actually a country in the morning or not. They're not viable. But basically we have around 200. America has troops in 150 of those 200 countries. So that, when we have troops in 3/4 of the nations around the world, it's hard to argue we're not an empire. It's very hard to argue that. And that really is the legacy of the progressive period, and then especially World War II. But we'll get to that later. So let's just look at page 559, and let me point out a couple of things. So Sumner, as I said, would be considered, we would label him today, though this term didn't exist at the time, we would probably label him a pretty radical libertarian overall, right? Even though that's an anachronistic term, that's probably what we would call him. He generally was fine with just being called a conservative. That's how he thought of himself, or as what might be called a classical liberal, the idea of Jeffersonian liberalism. So he was fine with all of that. But he's really the great academic in America who is opposed to imperial ambition. And the argument he makes, and I think it's a brilliant argument, the argument he makes is that every time we're imperial, we essentially become what our enemy was. So when we take on Spain, Spain actually defeats us because we become more like Spain than Spain becomes like us. And so it's really, even though we've militarily defeated Spain, we have done so by acting like Spain. And therefore, we have become Spain and an imperial power. So that's one of William Graham Sumner's ultimate arguments. And he notes, and I think he's very right about this, that the Constitution was never, under any circumstances, made for an imperialistic people. Our Constitution is made for a very Republican, very insular people. And it really doesn't do well with empire. And we've seen that with the expansion, of course, of the executive branch overall. But let's just look, page 559, turn to page 560 for a moment, and look there, roughly line 24 on 560. Territorial aggrandizement enhances the glory and personal importance of the man who is the head of a dynastic state. So automatically, imperialism always benefits the executive, right? It always benefits the president, but it's going to come at a huge cost. We're going to start losing the legislative. We're going to start losing the judicial. The fallacy of confusing this with the greatness and strength of the state itself is an open pitfall close at hand. It might seem that a republic, one of whose chief claims to superiority over a monarchy lies in avoiding the danger of confusing the king with the state, ought to be free from the fallacy of national greatness. But we have plenty of examples to prove that the traditional notions are not cut off by changing names and forms. And again, whatever your politics are today, Republican, Democrat, left, right, it's pretty clear that Trump has seen the kinds of things that he's done, both in Venezuela and in Iran, as a way of bolstering his own position, not only within society, but within government as well. And so, and it doesn't matter. Obama did the same thing. George Bush did the same thing. The last president we had who did not do this was Ronald Reagan. But every president, Republican, Democrat, we've had since then has been a progressive president in the way that they've approached imperial power and the way that they've spread American might. So turn forward on page 563 and look there at line 28, that paragraph. This confederated state of ours was never planned for indefinite expansion or for an imperial policy. We boast of it a great deal, but we must know that its advantages are won at the cost of limitations, as is the case with most things of the world. The fathers of the Republic planned a confederation of free and independent industrial commonwealths, right? A republic of republics, shielded by their geographical position from the jealousies, the rivalries, the traditional policies of the old world, and bringing all the resources of civilization to bear for the domestic happiness of this population only. They meant to have no grand statecraft or high politics, no balance of power, no reasons of state, which had cost the human race so much. They meant to offer no field for what Benjamin Franklin called the pest of glory. It is the limitation of this scheme of the state that the state created under it must forego a great number of the grand functions of European states, especially that it contains no method and apparatus of conquest, extension, domination, and imperialism. And again, I think all we have to do is look at the U.S. Constitution, and it's clear we are not meant to be an imperial power. Think about all war powers are reserved by the House and the Senate. The president can only go to war after Congress has declared war. And not only that, look at the great limitation on the Army in the Constitution. The Army can never be funded for more than 2 years at a time, right? There's always that 2-year limitation, always on the Army. There's no such limitation on the Navy, but there is on the Army because we fear a standing army. So again, it's very clear that we're not meant to be an imperialist power, but that's exactly what we've done. We've become exactly that. Okay, you guys, you see Sumner's argument there and what he's getting at. He's giving us both a theoretical as well as an empirical argument against imperialism. But then we look at the March of the Flag, and we have Albert Beveridge here, who is without question one of the most important, prominent progressives of his era. And even look at his dates there. Born during the Civil War, doesn't die until the 1920s. Right, so he's perfectly of that age. He's smack dab in the progressive period. And he is, along with another guy that we haven't talked about in class, a guy named E.A. Ross. They are both the prominent progressives of their period. So Albert Beveridge in terms of foreign policy, a guy named E.A. Ross in terms of domestic policy. They're outside of Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. They're the most prominent non-political of the progressives. But look what he says there. Let's just turn to page 566, line 8, that paragraph. It is a glorious history our God has bestowed upon his chosen people. All right, that should already make us feel very, very uncomfortable when we are being called the new Israel in all of this. His chosen people, a history heroic with faith in our mission and our future, a history of statesmen who flung the boundaries of the Republic out into unexplored lands and savage wilderness, a history of soldiers who carried the flag across blazing deserts and through the ranks of hostile mountains, even to the gates of sunset, a history of a multiplying people who overran a continent in half a century, a history of prophets who saw the consequences of evils inherited from the past, of the martyrs who died to save us from them, a history divinely logical, and in the process of whose tremendous reasoning we find ourselves today. Notice this is all an appeal to our vanity in every way. This idea of, well, this is America's greatness. God chose us. We have our own martyrs. We have our own saints. He sounds exactly like John L. O'Sullivan, and he sounds exactly like Lorenzo Dow. So that whole strain of the Second Great Awakening, that idea of democracy, that idea of imperialism, it really finds its fulfillment in progressive imperialism itself. And all of that comes together. I'll mention a third progressive that we haven't talked about yet at all, but an amazing guy, and I'm totally drawing a blank right now on his name. He's got a lake named after him in Utah. Oh my gosh, he's one-armed. He's shot at Shiloh, and he loses his arm, and then he scales the Grand Canyon one-armed. Like actually goes up the whole Grand Canyon one-armed, but I'm totally forgetting his name right now. Really incredible guy. But these progressives, they're all thinking in terms of, again, how do you use the state? Whether it's in foreign policy or domestic policy, how do you make this work? And so look there at the bottom of 567, that last full paragraph, the March of the Flag. In 1789, the flag of the Republic waved over 4 million souls in 13 states, and their savage territory which stretched to the Mississippi, to Canada, and to the Floridas. The timid minds of that day said that no new territory was needed, and for the hour they were right. But Jefferson, through whose intellect the centuries marched, Jefferson, who dreamed of Cuba as an American state, Jefferson, the first imperialist of the Republic, Jefferson acquired that imperial territory which swept from the Mississippi to the mountains, from Texas to the British possessions, and the march of the flag began. That's a little hard to stomach, to think of Jefferson as the first imperialist. There's no doubt he buys Louisiana, without great consternation for this, but the idea that he's the first imperialist, that's really changing our understanding of the founding. But notice here, and again, he sounds just like Crazy Lorenzo and just like John L. Sullivan. Look at the bottom of page 568. The ocean does not separate us from lands of our duty and desire. Remember what Godkin had just said, what Sumner had just said. The oceans give us this barrier against the old world. Well, now we return to that old argument. No, they don't. They connect us to the old world. The ocean does not separate us from the land of our duty and desire. The oceans join us. Rivers never to be dredged. Canals never to be repaired. Steam joins us. Electricity joins us. The very elements are in league with our destiny. Cuba, not contiguous. Puerto Rico, not contiguous. Hawaii and the Philippines, not contiguous. The oceans make them contiguous, and our Navy will make them contiguous, right? Contiguous meaning next door. So this idea that, well, that's over there, he tells us, well, no, that's not true at all. The oceans make us all neighbors and connect us. And right in that very understanding, do we think of the oceans as something that separates us from the world or something that connects us, in many ways shapes our foreign policy? How do we think of that? And I hope you guys aren't taking me wrong. I am not unimpressed with American military power, right? What we've done in Iran in the last several weeks is simply astounding. I'm not sure it's right, moral, or just, or even healthy, but it is powerful. There's no question about that. And so that argument we see here, what do we do with American power? So again, let's just finish up here with the March of the Flag. Look on page 571. Look at those last two paragraphs. There are so many real things to be done. Canals to be dug, railways to be laid, forests to be felled, cities to be builded, fields to be tilled, markets to be won, ships to be launched, peoples to be saved, civilization to be proclaimed, and the flag of liberty flung to the eager air of every sea. Is this an hour to waste upon trifles with nature's law? Is this a season to give our destiny over to wordmongers and prosperity wreckers? No. It is an hour to remember our duty to our homes. It is a moment to realize the opportunities fate has opened to us. And so it is an hour for us to stand by the government. Wonderfully has God guided us. Yonder at Bunker Hill in Yorktown, his providence was above us. At New Orleans and on the seas, his hand sustained us. Abraham Lincoln was his minister, and his was the altar of freedom the nation's soldiers set up on 100 battlefields. His destiny, John Wesley Powell, sorry, that's the one-armed guy, just came to me. His power directed Dewey in the east and delivered the Spanish fleet into our hands, as he delivered the elder Armada into the hands of our English sires 2 centuries ago. The American people cannot use a dishonest medium of exchange. It is ours to set the world its example of right and honor. So can you imagine? It's not just America's duty to take care of herself. It is her duty to remake the world in her image. And that's the ultimate progressive statement, that we have the desire to remake the world in our image. God has chosen us. We are the new Israel. right? And of course, this is heresy. I mean, it's absolute heresy. There's no way around it, this idea that America is the new Israel, right? But you see that so strongly coming from American democracy and playing itself out. Okay, does that make sense for everyone where this is going? So we see the two great arguments. But then I asked you guys to read this Anti-Imperialist League platform. And look who's in this. You know, it's amazing. So Godkin, right? We've already talked about Godkin, Willam Graham Sumner, Andrew Carnegie, Mark Twain. So some of the greatest men of their age are adamantly opposed to America's imperialism. And, you know, I hope you guys realize, and I'm sure many of you know the history of Vietnam, where we've got Americans fighting a guerrilla war in Vietnam for a decade. But we did that in the Philippines. American soldiers were fighting a guerrilla war in the Philippines for well over a decade after the Spanish-American War. It was a brutal, bloody war that we were in. And it was not on home turf at all. It was a foreign fight that we were making. And we had the great question, what do we do with the Philippines? And of course, you know, think about today, the Philippines are still a really messed up country. And it dates back to this time where we're messing with all of that. So one thing that we are very good at as Americans, and I don't think any of us could deny this, we are extremely good at projecting our power, but we are terrible at remaking the world in our image. We didn't remake Afghanistan. We didn't remake Iraq. We didn't remake Vietnam. We did remake Japan and Germany in our image after World War II. That we can say we did. But generally, we are very, very bad at remaking the world in our image. It's just not something we do well, and I don't think we know how to do it. And I think we make too many assumptions that are wrong-headed about it. Okay, does someone want to read for us, since I've been reading a lot? Let's read the Anti-Imperialist League platform. Anyone want to volunteer to read here? It's good stuff. So yeah, go ahead. Thank you. So just right there, we hold that the policy known as imperialism.
We hold that the policy known as imperialism is hostile to liberty and tends toward militarism, an evil from which it has been our glory to be free. We regret that it has become necessary in the land of Washington and Lincoln to reaffirm that all men, of whatever race or color, are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We maintain that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. We insist that the subjugation of any people is criminal aggression and open disloyalty to the distinctive principles of our government. We earnestly condemn the policy of the present national administration in the Philippines. It seeks to extinguish the spirit of 1776 in those islands. We deplore the sacrifice of our soldiers and sailors, whose bravery deserves admiration even in an unjust war. We denounce the slaughter of the Filipinos as a needless horror. We protest the extension of American sovereignty by Spanish methods. We demand the immediate cessation of the war against liberty begun by Spain and continued by us. We urge that Congress announce to the Filipinos our purpose to concede to them the independence for which they have so long fought and which of right is theirs. The United States have always protested against the doctrine of international law which permits the subjugation of the weak by the strong. A self-governing state cannot accept sovereignty over an unwilling people. The United States cannot act upon the ancient heresy that might makes right. Imperialists assume that with the destruction of self-government in the Philippines by American hands, all opposition here will cease. This is a grievous error. Much as we abhor the war of criminal aggression in the Philippines greatly, as we regret the blood of the Filipinos is on American hands, we more deeply resent the betrayal of American institutions at home. The real firing line is not in the suburbs of Manila. The foe is of our own household. The attempt of 1861 was to divide the country. That of 1899 is to destroy its fundamental principles and noblest ideals. Whether the ruthless slaughter of the Filipinos shall end next month or next year is but an incident in a contest that must go on until the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are rescued from the hands of their betrayers. Those who dispute about standards of value while the foundation of the Republic is undermined will be listened to as little as those who would wrangle about small economies of the household while the house is on fire. The training of a great people for a century, the aspiration for liberty of a vast immigration, are forces that will hurl aside those who in the delirium of conquest seek to destroy the character of our institutions. We deny that the obligation of all citizens to support their government in times of grave national peril applies to the present situation. If an administration may with impunity ignore the issues upon which it was chosen, deliberately create a condition of war everywhere on the face of the globe, debauch the civil service for spoils to promote the adventure, organize a truth-suppressing censorship, and demand of all citizens a suspension of judgment and their unanimous support, while it chooses to continue the fighting, representative government itself is imperiled. We propose to contribute to the defeat of any person or party that stands for the forcible subjugation of any people. We shall oppose for re-election all who in the White House or in Congress betray American liberty in pursuit of un-American ends. We still hope that both of our great political parties will support and defend the Declaration of Independence in the closing campaign of the century. We hold with Abraham Lincoln that no man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. When the white man governs himself, that is self-government. But when he governs himself and also governs another man, that is more than self-government. That is despotism. Our reliance is in the love of liberty which God has planted in us. Our defense is in the spirit which prizes liberty as a heritage of all men in all lands. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it. We cordially invite the cooperation of all men and women who remain loyal to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, that was great. Thank you. You did a really nice job. Thanks for reading all of that. All right, so again, we notice this. What's going on? This argument here. No, if you really believe in the founding, you cannot believe in imperialism. Imperialism is deadly in every way to the very meaning of the Declaration of the Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Okay, well, we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I want to finish with this. I want to just talk for a moment about the two most important progressive presidents, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. And I'll put it this way, and so again, I hope you guys realize I'm trying to be as objective about progressivism as possible. Both of these guys are progressive. But Teddy Roosevelt, we would never, ever put on the left in terms of the political spectrum. And Woodrow Wilson, we would never in any way, shape, or form put on the right. I always feel a little uncomfortable disagreeing with Teddy Roosevelt because he was a truly great man. He is a man of very high virtue. I disagree with much of his politics, but I think he was seriously a man of integrity and of virtue. Woodrow Wilson is one of the greatest scum ever to be born on American soil. He is just evil in every way. He's the reason we segregate the Army into black and white. We segregate the Navy into black and white. It had not been segregated before Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is the one who segregates Washington, D.C. and segregates all governmental institutions. So you could not have black men and black women in the same office as white men and white women after Wilson came in. He's horrible in every way. There are all kinds of women who were trying to get the vote, and he would watch out of the White House window as the police would just beat the living snot out of women protesting in front of the White House, and he loved it. So he's just, there's nothing good about Wilson. In every way, he's terrible. Both progressives, though, right? So one a good guy, the other just as bad as they can get. But let's just, for a moment, let's look at Teddy Roosevelt. Look on page 616. And just one of the most important statements here. Now, Teddy Roosevelt doesn't usually use the term progressive. He will. But he will adopt the term progressive. But he usually uses the term nationalism rather than progressive. But he means the same thing when he says nationalism or the new nationalism. He means progressive. So look what he says there. This is that first full paragraph on 616. And I think a very telling paragraph. The American people are right in demanding that the new nationalism, without which we cannot hope to deal with new problems. The new nationalism puts the national need before the sectional or personal advantage. It is impatient of the utter confusion that results from local legislatures attempting to treat national issues as local issues. It is still more impatient of the impotence which springs from the overdivision of governmental powers, the impotence which makes it possible for local selfishness or legal cunning hired by wealthy self-interests to bring national activities to a deadlock. Okay, that, if you're a nationalist, and I'm not, but if you are, his argument makes sense, right? Do we really want 50 states arguing about these things when we could have Washington just take care of the issue? I personally am in favor of 50 states arguing about these things, but he's not. Okay, we can grant his argument there, even in disagreeing with him. But it's the next sentence that matters so much. The new nationalism regards the executive power as the steward of public welfare. Well, remember, all we have to do is go back to Madison, and Madison tells us in the Federalist Papers, in a republic, it is always the legislature that represents the people's interests. So this is a massive, massive change in our understanding of government, that we would say that the president represents the people, not the legislative branch. And with the exception, with the very, very, very minor exceptions of Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, a little bit with Dwight D. Eisenhower, and a little bit with Reagan, every single president from Teddy Roosevelt to our current president right now has seen himself, not the legislature, as the embodiment of the American people. So Teddy Roosevelt is the beginning of that idea of a super strong presidency. And we had already seen it. It was in Lincoln and it was in Jackson, but it had never caught on, not until we get to Teddy Roosevelt. And so the executive becomes the predominant power in government. And, I think we could probably have a good argument in this room. I think that's terrible. Whether it's left or right, conservative, Republican, Democrat, liberal, it doesn't matter. I don't think any president, left or right, should have that kind of power. I think that the Constitution dictates that the president is only there to execute the laws that Congress has made. But for all intents and purposes, and this again, we'd be foolish to ignore this, Congress has been utterly impotent since about 1946. So it has done almost nothing since 1946. And even when it's done great things, like passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's acting way behind American society. American society had already gotten to the point of non-discrimination when Congress jumps in the game. So Congress is truly impotent, and that I don't know how to fix that. I have no idea how to fix that in any way, shape, or form. But it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Okay, well, the other thing I asked you to read for today, and let's finish with this. I asked you to read Woodrow Wilson's The Idea of the New Freedom. And I want to point out what he says about progressivism. Because even more than Teddy Roosevelt, we always think of Woodrow Wilson as the ultimate progressive president. He is, when we think of progressivism, it's Woodrow Wilson. We think of Teddy Roosevelt too, but it's really Woodrow Wilson as the prime example of progressivism. Look what he says at the top of 623. Progress. Did you ever reflect that the word is almost a new one? No word comes more often or more naturally to the lips of modern man, as if the thing it stands for were almost synonymous with life itself. And yet men, through many thousands of years, never talked or thought of progress. They thought in the other direction. Their stories of heroism and glory were tales of the past. The ancestor wore the heavier armor and carried the larger spear. There were giants in those days. Now all that is altered. We think of the future, not the past, as the more glorious time in comparison, with which the present is nothing. Progress, development, these are modern words. The modern idea is to leave the past and press onward to something new. Well, you kind of want to say to Woodrow, calm down, buddy, right? It's not as great as you think it is. But he's in ecstasy as he's talking about progress, right? He can't get enough of it. But then he tries to define it. And look at what he says. And this is where I want to spend just a little bit of time to finish us today. Look at the bottom of 624. And I want you guys to mark this. These three paragraphs right here, starting with the makers of the federal Constitution, the next paragraph, the trouble with the theory, and then all that progressives ask. I want you guys to mark those three paragraphs, because this, especially for your final, I want you to come back to these three, because this is the best definition we have of progressivism. Even though I've been talking about it now for lecture after lecture, this is the perfect summation in our document. The makers of our federal Constitution read Montesquieu with true scientific enthusiasm. They were scientists in their way, the best of their age, those fathers of the nation. Jefferson wrote of the laws of nature, and then by way of afterthought, of nature's God. And they constructed a government as they would have constructed an orrery. An orrery is a map of the solar system, to display the laws of nature. Politics in their thought was a variety of mechanics. The Constitution was founded on the law of gravitation. The government was to exist and move by virtue of the efficacy of checks and balances. You guys are just going to have to trust me. I'm 58. I've spent my entire adult life studying the American founding. Woodrow Wilson is just 100% wrong about this. Nobody in the founding said that we were like a solar system. Right? This is crazy what he's talking about here. He's totally making this up. The trouble with the theory is that government is not a machine, but a living thing. It falls not under the theory of the universe, but under the theory of organic life. It is accountable to Darwin, not to Newton. It is modified by its environment, necessitated by its tasks, shaped to its functions by the sheer pressure of life. No living thing can have its organs offset against each other as checks and live. On the contrary, its life is dependent upon their quick cooperation, their ready response to the commands of instinct or intelligence, their amicable community of purpose. Government is not a body of blind forces, it is a body of men with highly differentiated functions, no doubt, in our modern day of specialization, with a common task and purpose. Their cooperation is indispensable, their warfare fatal. There can be no successful government without the intimate, instinctive coordination of the organs of life and action. This is not theory, but fact, and displays its force as fact, whatever theories may be thrown across the track. Living political constitutions must be Darwinian in structure and practice. Society is a living organism and must obey the laws of life, not of mechanics it must develop. All that progressives ask or desire is permission in an era when development, evolution is the scientific word, to interpret the Constitution according to the Darwinian principle, all they ask is recognition of the fact that a nation is a living thing and not a machine. Well, notice what he's just done. If we can define the Constitution according to Darwin, then we can dismiss it as a relic of the past. This is his way of totally dismissing the founding, because we have now evolved past it. And this is the most dangerous argument you could ever make about the founding and about government. But that's the essence of progressivism. Okay, guys, I took you over a minute. I promised to give you that minute back at some point in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, I would like you guys for Friday, I would like you to read Calvin Coolidge's letter on the Declaration of Independence. Right, so he has the Calvin Coolidge, the inspiration of the Declaration, and I would like you to read the Franklin Roosevelt pieces that we have in the Reader. So read Calvin Coolidge, the inspiration of the Declaration, and Franklin Roosevelt. There are 4 pieces we have from Franklin Roosevelt. They're all pretty short, but read those as well. All right, thanks, guys.